I believe in giving credit to whatever inspires me to create. Because every piece I write has a lineage. For example, I once wrote a comedic piece about the herpes cadence song. And what inspired that was the classic sitcom. All in the Family, a show that used humor to tackle stigmas head-on. This piece, however, comes from a different corner of my childhood and my favorite TV memories. I grew up watching courtroom comedies and reality court shows that blended absurdity with real-life relatability. At the top of that list is Night Court, by far one of my favorite sitcoms of all time. What made it so iconic was how relatable it was. As ridiculous as some of the cases were, most of them were rooted in things that could actually happen. With the occasional sci-fi twist, like disappearing people, Star Trek fans, or the Road Runner and Wile E. Coyote showing up in court. Those episodes were pure comedic gold. The characters were unforgettable. Bull Shannon, the lovable giant of a bailiff. Roz, with her no-nonsense humor. Velma and Florence, the earlier bailiffs who left their mark. Dan Fielden, the outrageous defense attorney. And of course, Judge Harry Stone, the heart of the show. Every character had a role, and every role had heart. But my inspiration didn't stop with sitcoms. Some of it came from animation, especially stories that showed how there are always two sides to every situation. One of the biggest influences was the animated film Hoodwinked, in that movie, The Frog Detective Questions. Little Red Riding Hood, the Wolf, Granny, and even the Woodsman. And each one tells a completely different version of the same event. What made it brilliant was that once you heard everyone's side, you realized none of them were guilty. The real culprit was the one character nobody suspected, the innocent little bunny. That idea stuck with me. Perspective changes everything. Another inspiration came from an old Looney Tunes courtroom cartoon involving Little Red Riding Hood and the Wolf. At first, Red Riding Hood seemed like the victim, until the wolf told his side, and suddenly he seemed like the victim. The entire thing was exaggerated, comedic, and unforgettable, and it planted the seed that a courtroom can be a place where truth is not always what it seems, and humor can reveal the humanity behind the conflict. Then there were the reality court pioneers. Growing up in the 80s, the first courtroom show I ever saw was Judge Wapner on the People's Court. The OG, everyone remembers that bass line, everyone remembers those eyebrows. And of course, later came Judge Judy, who became a cultural force all her own. All of these shows shaped the way I see courtroom storytelling. But what truly inspired this piece is something you rarely see. A judge acting like a marriage counselor instead of a referee. I've seen real cases where the husband and wife sit on opposite sides of the courtroom, each with their own attorney, each treated like opposing nations at war. But every once in a while, and I've only seen it once, the couple looks at each other, realizes how ridiculous the fight is, and decides to work it out. The attorneys don't complain because they've already been paid. The judge moves on, and the couple leaves better than they came. That rare moment, that spark of humanity is what inspired this piece. I'm not making fun of marriage. I'm not bashing any gender. I'm showing that sometimes a marriage doesn't need a courtroom. It needs a reminder. A reminder of why two people chose each other in the first place. A reminder that not every disagreement requires separation. Sometimes all it takes is compromise, humor, and a third party who sees the bigger picture. That's why I wrote this. That's why Judge Grumpy exists. To show that even in the middle of chaos, pettiness, and pillows, Sometimes love just needs a nudge.
Reporter Dan Gathers walks into the courthouse. Good afternoon, folks. This is Dan Gathers reporting live from the 47th District Court of Maplewood County, affectionately known by locals as the Court of Last Nerves. Presiding today is the Honorable Judge Horace Grumpy, and let me tell you, the man has earned that nickname. He has been dealing with felony charges, misdemeanors, parking violations, and one gentleman who tried to plead insanity because his cat told him to speed. But now we have reached the final stretch of his day, 2 back-to-back divorce hearings. The first is expected to be straightforward, 2 adults who simply could not reconcile. No drama, no theatrics, just a clean separation. The second one, well, the court staff has already placed a violinist on standby. Let us step inside and see how things unfold. The bailiff steps forward. All rise. The 47th District Court of Maplewood County is now in session. The Honorable Judge Horace Grumpy presiding. Footsteps echo as the judge enters. A chair slides. Judge Grumpy settles in. Judge Grumpy says, "You may be seated." I am Judge Horace Grumpy presiding, unfortunately. Today marks the end of a very long day. I have handled felony charges, misdemeanors, parking violations, and one gentleman who insisted his emotional support iguana had diplomatic immunity. So let me be perfectly clear, I am tired, I am hungry, and my blood pressure is currently negotiating its own plea deal. We have 2 cases left too. The first is a standard dissolution of marriage, clean, respectful, no theatrics, a rare blessing. The second case is why I keep antacids in my robe. Now then, counsel for the plaintiff, please approach the bench and present your opening statement, and for the love of all things legal, spare me the Shakespeare monologue. Judge Grumpy continues. Case number 22-184, Martin versus Martin. Counsel, you may proceed. Plaintiff's counsel stands. Your Honor, my client and her spouse have mutually agreed that their marriage has reached its natural conclusion. There is no misconduct, no hostility, and no dispute regarding property or finances. Judge Grumpy looks at the defense attorney. Defense counsel proceeds. Your Honor, my client concurs. They have attempted counseling, communication, and reconciliation. They simply grew apart. Judge Grumpy looks at the couple. Mr. and Mrs. Martin, do you both confirm that this decision is mutual, voluntary, and made with respect for one another? Mrs. Martin answers, "Yes, Your Honor." Mr. Martin answers, "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Grumpy grabs his gavel and says, "Very well, the court acknowledges your maturity and the dignity with which you have handled this. Your dissolution of marriage is granted. I wish you both peace moving forward." A single gavel tap echoes through the courtroom. The room falls quiet, clean, no drama. Reporter Dan Gathers reports. A respectful, amicable separation, no theatrics, no accusations, a rare moment of calm in this courtroom. But folks, do not get comfortable. The next case is already causing Judge Grumpy to rub his temples. Judge Grumpy opens his next folder, sighs, and proceeds. Case number 22-185, Henderson versus Henderson. Plaintiff's counsel, proceed. Plaintiff's counsel stands. Your Honor, today we stand at the crossroads of justice, destiny, and a very unfortunate misunderstanding entailing a shared Netflix password. Judge Grumpy exhales sharply. He reaches for his antacid bottle, but does not open it. Plaintiff's counsel continues. My client, the plaintiff, has endured emotional turbulence, psychological distress, and the tragic horror of discovering the toilet seat in the upright position not once, but 7 times in a single week. Judge Grumpy's eyebrow twitches. The antacid bottle cap clicks open. Plaintiff's counsel continues. We intend to prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that this marriage has suffered irreparable harm due to chronic inconsideration, weaponized silence, and the defendant's suspicious habit of breathing too loudly during football season. Judge Grumpy drops an antacid tablet into his cup. Plaintiff's counsel continues. And therefore we seek justice, closure, and possibly sole custody of the air fryer. Judge Grumpy replies, proceed before my antacid wears off.
Defense counsel stands slowly and adjusts his tie. Your Honor, esteemed opposing counsel, and the court reporter who is definitely judging all of us in silence. Today, the defense will show that this is not a case of cruelty, malice, or emotional sabotage. This is a case of 2 people who forgot that they married a human being and not a customizable setting menu. Defense counsel walks a few steps, speaking with calm confidence. My client, the defendant, stands accused of grave domestic offenses, leaving the toilet seat up, breathing too loudly during football season, and the most serious allegation of all, failing to read minds on a consistent basis. Judge Grumpy rubs his forehead and stares down at the file. Defense counsel continues. We intend to prove that my client is not a villain, but a man who has spent years trying his best under constantly changing unwritten rules. Rules such as, if I say I am fine, I am absolutely not fine, and you should know why. Rules such as, if I start a sentence with never mind, you should still solve the problem I did not explain. Reporter Dan Gathers whispers under his breath, ladies and gentlemen, the phrase never mind has officially entered the record. Defense counsel glances at the plaintiff and back to the judge. Your Honor, we will also demonstrate that the plaintiff's claims of never helping with the children are exaggerated at best. My client has, on multiple occasions, provided what he believed to be meaningful parental guidance. He has said, and I quote, listen to your mother. In some households, that is considered a full mission statement. Judge Grumpy slowly lifts his cup and takes a sip of his Alka-Seltzer mixture. Defense counsel continues. Furthermore, we will show that the alleged crime of leaving the toilet seat up was not an act of aggression, but a tragic oversight committed in the dark at 3 a.m. after eating leftover chili. There was no malice, only poor lighting and regret. A quiet chuckle ripples through the courtroom. Defense counsel presses on. In conclusion, Your Honor, the defense will show that this marriage is not suffering from evil intent, but from petty frustrations, unspoken expectations, and 2 people who stop giving each other the benefit of the doubt. We do not seek to win a war here. We seek understanding, fairness, and, if the court allows, joint custody of the recliner. Judge Grumpy stares at both parties, then at the stack of files on his desk. Wonderful, we have Netflix, toilet seats, breathing, and a recliner on the record. At At this rate, my antacid is going to need its own attorney. Reporter Dan Gathers speaks softly to the imaginary audience. Folks, the judge's patience is hanging by a thread. Up next, we will hear from the people at the center of the storm, the Hendersons themselves. Judge Grumpy straightens in his chair. Very well. We will now hear testimony from the plaintiff. Mrs. Henderson, please approach the stand.
Mrs. Henderson slowly rises from her seat. She smooths the front of her dress, takes a steadying breath, and walks toward the witness stand. Her heels click softly against the courtroom floor. When she reaches the stand, she sits down carefully and adjusts the microphone. Judge Grumpy says, "Mrs. Henderson, please state your name for the record." Mrs. Henderson answers, "Rebecca Henderson." Judge Grumpy nods once and rubs the bridge of his nose. "Very well, Mrs. Henderson, you may begin your testimony." Mrs. Henderson folds her hands together and begins speaking. "Your Honor, I have been married to this man for 12 years, and in that time I have endured things no spouse should ever have to endure." Judge Grumpy blinks once, very slowly as if bracing himself. Reporter Dan Gathers whispers softly. The judge blinked. That is never a good sign. Mrs. Henderson continues. "For starters, Your Honor, he leaves dishes in the sink, not in the dishwasher, not even near the dishwasher in the sink, and not just any dishes. I am talking about bowls with dried oatmeal that could be used as construction adhesive." Defense counsel shifts in his seat and clears his throat. Mrs. Henderson lifts her eyebrows and continues. "And every morning, without fail, he asks me where his keys are. Every morning, as if I am the keeper of all lost objects. Your Honor, I do not hide his keys. I do not touch his keys. I do not even look at his keys. But somehow, every morning, it becomes my responsibility to locate them." Judge Grumpy tilts his head back and stares at the ceiling for a moment, as if silently asking the universe for patience. Mrs. Henderson presses on. "And let us talk about the thermostat, Your Honor. This man treats the thermostat like it is a sacred artifact. If I raise it by 1 degree, just one, he acts like I have committed treason against the electric company." Reporter Dan Gathers leans slightly forward and says quietly, "The judge's left eyebrow has begun to rise. This is known as the Grumpy Arch." Mrs. Henderson continues, "And the snoring, Your Honor, I have recorded it. I have evidence. It sounds like a lawnmower fighting a bear. I have not had a full night of sleep since 2019. Judge Grumpy lets out a tired sigh and mutters, "I should have retired in 2018. Mrs. Henderson nods as if proving his point. "And then there is the matter of the laundry. He puts his clean clothes in the dirty hamper because, and I quote, 'It is easier, Your Honor. I cannot live like that. I cannot live in a world where clean clothes are sacrificed to the laundry gods for no reason.'" Defense counsel sighs loudly and rubs his forehead. Mrs. Henderson takes a deep breath and prepares for her final point. "And finally, Your Honor, the biggest issue of all, the one that broke me, the one that made me realize this marriage was doomed." Judge Grumpy leans forward slightly, bracing himself. Mrs. Henderson says, "He ate the last slice of cheesecake, my cheesecake, the cheesecake I bought, the cheesecake I labeled, the cheesecake I hid behind the vegetables because I knew he would never look there. A quiet gasp moves through the courtroom. Mrs. Henderson finishes, and when I confronted him, he said, and I quote, "I thought you were saving it for me. Your Honor, that was the moment I knew this marriage could not be saved." Judge Grumpy closes the folder in front of him very slowly, as if mourning the loss of his remaining sanity. "Mrs. Henderson, thank you for your testimony, I suppose." Reporter Dan Gathers speaks softly. "Ladies and gentlemen, the judge is now staring into the middle distance. This is known as the 1,000-yard Grumpy stare. Judge Grumpy clears his throat and straightens his posture. Very well, we will now hear from the defendant, Mr. Henderson. Please approach the stand."
Mr. Henderson stands up slowly, brushing off his shirt as if preparing for battle. He straightens his posture, clears his throat, and walks toward the witness stand with the solemn determination of a man who has rehearsed this moment in the shower. He sits down, adjusts the microphone, and folds his hands. Judge Grumpy looks at him with tired eyes. "State your name for the record." Mr. Henderson answers, "Daniel Henderson." Judge Grumpy nods. "Proceed with your testimony, Mr. Henderson." Mr. Henderson takes a deep breath. "Your Honor, I love my wife, I truly do, but there are things I have endured that no man should have to face." Judge Grumpy raises one eyebrow just slightly. Reporter Dan Gathers whispers, "The eyebrow has risen. We are officially in danger." Mr. Henderson continues, "First, Your Honor, I would like to address the issue of my tools. My tools are sacred. They are organized. They have a system I created, a system that works, but my wife treats my tools like they are community property. She will take a hammer to open a bag of chips. She will use my power drill to hang a scarf, Your Honor." Defense counsel places a hand over his mouth to hide a smile. Mr. Henderson presses on. And when she is done, she does not put the tools back where they belong. She puts them wherever gravity decides. I once found my wrench in the fruit bowl. The fruit bowl, Your Honor. Judge Grumpy closes his eyes for a moment, as if silently praying for strength. Mr. Henderson continues. "Next, Your Honor, I would like to discuss the pillows, the decorative pillows, the pillows that serve no purpose. We have 23 pillows on our bed, 23 I counted. And every night I have to remove them. And every morning she puts them back. I have not seen the actual surface of our bed in 6 years." Reporter Dan Gathers leans forward. Ladies and gentlemen, the judge's left eye just twitched. Mr. Henderson continues. "And then there is the matter of the half-drunk beverages. Your Honor, my wife will open a bottle of water, take 2 sips and abandon it. She will open a can of soda, take 1 sip and forget it exists. At any given moment, our home contains no fewer than 9 partially consumed drinks. It is like living in a hydration crime scene." Judge Grumpy rubs his temples slowly. Mr. Henderson continues. "And the lights, Your Honor. My wife believes electricity is a suggestion. Every light in the house stays on, all of them. I walk through our home at night, and it looks like an airport runway." Defense counsel coughs to hide a laugh. Mr. Henderson takes another breath. And finally, Your Honor, the biggest issue, the one that broke me, the one that made me realize this marriage was doomed. Judge Grumpy leans forward slightly, bracing himself. Mr. Henderson says, "She reorganized the kitchen without telling me. Your Honor, I went to get a plate, and instead I found a colander. I went to get a fork, and I found a whisk. For 3 days I lived like a man lost in the wilderness." A quiet gasp moves through the courtroom. Mr. Henderson finishes. And when I asked her why she moved everything, she said, and I quote, "Because it made more sense this way, Your Honor. Nothing has made sense since." Judge Grumpy lets out a long, exhausted breath. "Mr. Henderson, thank you for your testimony, I think." Reporter Dan Gathers speaks softly. The judge is now staring at the wall. This is known as the Grumpy disassociation. Judge Grumpy straightens his robe. "Very well, we will now proceed to the presentation of evidence. God help us all."
In front of him and clears his throat. "We will now proceed to the presentation of evidence, plaintiff. You may begin." Plaintiff's counsel stands and walks toward the evidence table with the confidence of someone about to unveil national secrets. He lifts a small folder and holds it up. Plaintiff's counsel says, "Your Honor, Exhibit A, audio evidence of the defendant's snoring." A murmur moves through the courtroom. Plaintiff's counsel continues. "This recording was captured at 2:30 in the morning. Mrs. Henderson assures us this is an accurate representation of nightly conditions in the Henderson household." Judge Grumpy closes his eyes for a moment, as if preparing for impact. "Very well, play the recording." Plaintiff's counsel presses a button on a small speaker. A loud, monstrous snoring sound fills the courtroom. It sounds like a chainsaw wrestling a vacuum cleaner. Several people in the gallery jump. One woman clutches her purse. A man in the back whispers, "Good Lord." Judge Grumpy's eyes widen. He grips the edge of his bench. Turn it off before the ceiling collapses." The sound stops abruptly. Reporter Dan Gathers leans toward his microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, the judge's soul briefly attempted to escape his body." Judge Grumpy exhales slowly. Exhibit A is noted, very noted, too noted. Plaintiff's counsel nods and sets the speaker aside. "Your Honor, Exhibit B, a photograph of the toilet seat in the upright position. Taken 7 times in 1 week." He hands the photo to the bailiff, who delivers it to the judge. Judge Grumpy looks at the photo, then looks at Mr. Henderson, then looks back at the photo. "Mr. Henderson, this seat is not just up. It is aggressively up. It is at attention." Mr. Henderson shifts uncomfortably. "It was dark, Your Honor." Judge Grumpy replies, "It looks like it was saluting." Reporter Dan Gathers whispers, "The judge is losing structural integrity." Plaintiff's counsel continues. "And finally, Your Honor, Exhibit C, the empty cheesecake container." Gasps ripple through the courtroom. Plaintiff's counsel holds up the container like it is a sacred relic.
This was the plaintiff's cheesecake purchased by her, labeled by her, hidden behind vegetables because the defendant does not eat vegetables. Mr. Henderson raises a finger. Your Honor, I do eat vegetables. Sometimes if they are in soup. Judge Grumpy stares at him without blinking. Sir, soup is not a vegetable. Mr. Henderson lowers his hand. Plaintiff's counsel places the empty container on the evidence table with dramatic finality. Judge Grumpy sighs deeply. Very well, the court acknowledges exhibits A, B, and C. Now let us proceed to the defense. Defense counsel stands and walks to the evidence table with the solemnity of a man carrying emotional baggage. Defense counsel says, Your Honor, Exhibit 1, a photograph of the defendant's tool bench. This is how it is supposed to look. He hands the photo to the bailiff, who brings it to the judge. Judge Grumpy studies the photo. Very organized, very neat, very symmetrical. Defense counsel nods. Now, Your Honor, Exhibit 2, a photograph of the tool bench after Mrs. Henderson borrowed a hammer to open a bag of chips. The bailiff delivers the second photo. Judge Grumpy's jaw drops slightly. Where is everything? Defense counsel answers, We do not know, Your Honor, we are still looking. Reporter Dan gathers whispers. The judge is blinking rapidly. This is known as the Grumpy flutter. Defense counsel continues. Exhibit 3, a collection of half-tongue beverages found in the Henderson home within a 24-hour period. He gestures to a tray holding 9 bottles and cans, each with varying amounts of liquid. Judge Grumpy stares at the tray. This looks like evidence from a hydration crime scene. Defense counsel nods gravely. That is correct, Your Honor. Defense counsel lifts one final item. And lastly, Exhibit 4, a map of the Henderson kitchen before and after Mrs. Henderson reorganized it. He hands the map to the judge. Judge Grumpy studies it with growing horror. This is chaos. This is anarchy. This is culinary terrorism. Mrs. Henderson folds her arms. It made more sense that way. Judge Grumpy replies, Ma'am, nothing about this makes sense. Reporter Dan gathers whispers. The judge is now staring into the void. The void is staring back. Judge Grumpy sets the papers down and rubs his forehead. Very well, the court acknowledges all evidence presented. At this point, I am questioning not only this marriage, but the entire concept of marriage. He takes a slow breath. We will now proceed to closing arguments. Heaven help us.
Plaintiffs. Counsel rises from his seat with dramatic flair. He straightens his jacket, clears his throat loudly, and steps toward the center of the courtroom as if preparing for a Broadway monologue. Plaintiff's counsel says, Your Honor, what we have witnessed today is not merely a marriage in distress. No, what we have witnessed is a textbook case of chronic domestic inconsideration syndrome. A confused murmur spreads through the courtroom. Plaintiff's counsel continues, This condition, Your Honor, is characterized by repeated offenses such as leaving the toilet seat up, misplacing keys, and producing snoring sounds that violate several noise ordinances. Judge Grumpy slowly lowers his head into his hand. Plaintiff's counsel presses on. My client has endured emotional turbulence, sleep deprivation, and the psychological trauma of discovering her cheesecake missing. Your Honor, this is not just dessert theft. This is cheesecake-related emotional sabotage disorder. Reporter Dan gathers whispers. The judge's right eye just twitched. This is known as the Grumpy spasm. Plaintiff's counsel lifts the empty cheesecake container like a sacred artifact. Exhibit C proves beyond all doubt that the defendant suffers from impulsive dessert consumption compulsion, a dangerous condition. Your Honor, dangerous. Mr. Henderson shakes his head in disbelief. Plaintiff's counsel continues. And let us not forget the thermostat incident. My client has been subjected to temperature tyranny, Your Honor. She has worn sweaters indoors in July. Judge Grumpy mutters, I am too old for this. Plaintiff's counsel finishes with a dramatic flourish. In conclusion, Your Honor, my client suffers from post-traumatic snoring disorder, cheesecake loss fatigue, and thermostat-induced emotional exhaustion. We ask the court for justice, closure, and the right to live in a home where the toilet seat remains in its natural, downward position. He returns to his seat with exaggerated dignity. Judge Grumpy exhales slowly. Defense counsel, please just get this over with. Defense counsel stands, adjusts his tie, and walks forward with the calm confidence of a man who has accepted his fate. Defense counsel says, Your Honor, while my esteemed colleague has presented a compelling case of dessert-related trauma, the defense must highlight the equally devastating conditions my client has endured. He gestures toward Mr. Henderson. Defense counsel continues. My client suffers from acute tool displacement disorder. This condition is triggered when tools are removed from their designated locations and returned to random, illogical places such as fruit bowls. Judge Grumpy closes his eyes for a moment. Defense counsel presses on. He also suffers from pillow overload syndrome, 23 decorative pillows, Your Honor, 23. This is not interior design. This is suffocation by aesthetics. A few people in the gallery laugh quietly. Defense counsel continues. And let us not overlook beverage abandonment fatigue. At any given time, my client is surrounded by half-drunk liquids. He lives in a home where hydration is started but never finished. Reporter Dan gathers whispers. The judge is staring at the wall again. This is the Grumpy disassociation. Defense counsel lifts the kitchen map. And finally, Your Honor, the most severe condition of all spatial orientation trauma. My client woke up one morning and discovered that the kitchen had been reorganized without warning. For 3 days, he wandered the home like a lost explorer. Judge Grumpy rubs his forehead. I cannot believe I went to law school for this. Defense counsel finishes. In conclusion, Your Honor, my client suffers from tool-related anxiety, pillow compression stress, and kitchen reorganization shock. We ask the court for fairness, understanding, and joint custody of the recliner. He returns to his seat. Judge Grumpy sits silently for a long moment.
staring at nothing. Reporter Dan gathers whispers. Ladies and gentlemen, the judge has entered a state known as grumpy suspension. He is here, but spiritually, he is elsewhere. Judge Grumpy finally speaks. Very well, the court will now prepare to deliver its ruling. Heaven, help us all.
Grumpy sits silently for a long moment. He stares at both parties with the expression of a man who has aged 10 years in one afternoon. The courtroom is completely still. Reporter Dan gathers whispers. Ladies and gentlemen, the judge is preparing for battle. Judge Grumpy finally speaks. After hearing both sides reviewing the evidence and questioning my own life choices, I have reached a decision. Both attorneys straighten. Mr. and Mrs. Henderson hold their breath. Judge Grumpy continues. I hereby rule that the husband, Mr. Henderson, shall receive the house, the flowers, the pillows, and the fruit bowl. Mr. Henderson's mouth drops open. Mrs. Henderson's eyes widen. A ripple of shock moves through the courtroom. Judge Grumpy does not pause. And I further rule that Mrs. Henderson shall receive all of the husband's tools, the trucks, the man cave, and the toilet. A stunned silence fills the room. Reporter Dan gathers whispers. The judge has gone full King Solomon. Both attorneys look at their clients, who are now whispering frantically. Plaintiff's counsel stands. Your Honor, my client wishes to state that this ruling is not just he says. Her husband is not a bad man. She says he can keep his tools. She would never take those from him. She says he is good at fixing things, and he is not that bad. Mrs. Henderson leans in and whispers something urgently to her attorney. Plaintiff's counsel adds. And my client also says she can buy herself noise-canceling headphones for his snoring. She says that is a reasonable compromise. Mrs. Henderson nods firmly. As if proud of her solution, defense counsel rises immediately. Your Honor, my client also wishes to state that this ruling is not just. He says his wife is not a bad person. He says she can keep the pillows. She can keep the house. She is a good woman. And he says he can work on lowering the toilet seat. It is not that bad. Mr. Henderson nods, looking embarrassed but sincere. Plaintiff's counsel stands again. And Your Honor, my client would also like to add that her husband is not that bad. She says she can remove about 6 pillows a week. She can start there. Mrs. Henderson gives a small smile toward her husband. Defense counsel rises once more. And my client says that his wife is not unreasonable. He says he can label his tools better. He says he can try not to panic when she moves things. He says he can live with the fruit bowl. Mr. Henderson shrugs sheepishly. Judge Grumpy watches them quietly. For the first time all day, he smiles, a small smile, but a real one. Judge Grumpy says, it appears the court has succeeded in something neither of you could do on your own. You have both remembered that you actually like each other. Reporter Dan gathers whispers. The judge has performed a miracle, a grumpy miracle. Judge Grumpy continues. Therefore, the court withdraws the previous ruling. Instead, I order the following. You two will go home. You will talk. You will laugh about this. And you will remember that marriage is not destroyed by snoring, pillows, tools, or cheesecake. It is destroyed when people stop giving each other grace. The courtroom is silent. Mr. and Mrs. Henderson look at each other with softened eyes. Judge Grumpy taps his gavel once. Case dismissed. And for the love of all things legal, go fix your marriage. Reporter Dan Gathers steps forward. Ladies and gentlemen, the Hendersons leave the courtroom side by side. And Judge Grumpy, well, he has restored peace once again. Until the next case.
I labeled my cheesecake and hid it behind the kale. I reorganized the kitchen while you were gone. You wandered lost, but still came home at dawn. I'm still mad, but you're still mine. You left the toilet seat up like it's waving goodbye. You snored like a chainsaw, stealing sleep from my eyes. I'm still mad, but you're still mine. I used your drill to open up a bag of chips. You sighed real loud, but you didn't call it quits. I'm still mad, but you're still mine. I bought 23 pillows for the bed last night. You complained a little, but you still held me tight. I'm still mad, but you're still mine.
We got evidence stacked up, Exhibit A through Z. But somehow all this petty stuff still means you're home to me. I'm still mad, but you're still mine.
Yeah, I'm still mad, but you're still mine. Keep your chaos,
I'll keep mine.
we can fight about it later. Honey, I'm still mad, but you're still mine. Judge dropped that Solomon bomb, tried to split us in two.
Gave me the toilet, gave you the man cave too. Watched us both panic, like wait,
Take it back. Turns out we'd rather fight together than face the aftermath. I'm still mad, but you're still mine.
we got clauses in fine print written right above. We got the rules and little quirks,
But somehow all this madness still works. I'm still mad, but you're still mine. I'm still mad, but you're still mine. Through the thermostat wars and the snoring every night. Throw the grudges out, keep the laughter and the fight. I'm still mad, but you're still mine. Yeah, you're still mine. mine. Baby, you're still mine.